Okay, wonderful. It looks like it at least has slowed down a little bit. Maybe while others are coming in, hello, welcome. If you're just coming in, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat to see who else is in the room. Maybe while they're doing that, we also take a moment to introduce ourselves first. So I'm Julie Hawk. I'm the Peacebuilding and Research Lead with Build Up, and excited to be joining on this webinar with Elena and Zach. You guys want to go ahead?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Elena. I am a co-founder and strategy lead at Build Up. And I'm also acting as the issue editor for this Accord publication. So I'm really excited to be sharing some of what we've been doing on this and hear your thoughts about what else we might do. Zand, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Elena. Yeah, I'm Zand Ramsbottom. I work at Conciliation Resources and we produce the Accord publication. It's really exciting to be part of this project and to be in this webinar with everyone here. So thanks so much, everyone, for coming.
Great. Maybe from there, Zan, we can just kick right off with you telling us a bit more about Accord.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, happy to do that. So yeah, as I said, I work for Conciliation Resources. We're an independent peace building organization. So we're interested in working with others to build peace in different parts of the world. But we're also very interested in how you learn about how peace works. And one of the ways we do that is a publication called Accord, which is designed to help understand what you need to do to build peace. And it's a lot of it is written by people who do that. That's what they do, and that's what a lot of our contributions to the publication come from. Um, it's been going for 30 years now, and this latest project that we're doing is the 31st publication in the series. So we are really happy to be partnering with Build Up on this publication. And we're really trying to understand in today's world where tech and AI are intrinsic to how wars are fought and how peace needs to be made, how can we integrate tech and AI throughout the peacemaking system, through the peacemaking architecture, in policy, in practice, in different types of institution? Essentially, we're asking sort of three questions that we want to find out more about to understand this better. First, why tech and AI need to be integrated in peacemaking? Why do peacemakers need to care about this? How are digital technologies affecting geopolitics, affecting conflict, and affecting peacemaking itself? Second question we're wanting to find out more about is what can digital peacemaking do? You know, how can we address the negative impact of technology on conflict? Tech and AI as tools for peacemaking, what do they do? How can we use them? How can we use them better? And then how can peacemaking inform tech governance, design, and rights? And then the last question we want to find out more about is, okay, we know we want to do it, we know what it can do. How do we actually go about integrating tech and IA in peacemaking institutions, in peacemaking strategies? How do people use it? How do offline and online peacemakers work together to make the system more effective? Um, Accord is very collaborative. We involve lots of different people in different projects. We really appreciate this moment to reach out to all of you and hear what you've got to say and build that into our thinking about how the project works and we'll go forward. And we hope we can keep these channels open because that's a big part of how we hopefully make a good product is the interaction with people like you. So that's enough for me, I think. I'll hand back over to Julie.
Actually, maybe I can take it directly from there to talk about what we're going to do on the webinar today. Zan talked about these kind of three questions about the why, the what, and the how. The other thing that is structuring this publication is, in a way, the four areas of inquiry that we think are a snapshot of where our field of peace building and mediation is at in terms of engagement with technology. The first area of inquiry is around what is the impact of technology on conflict? So how is technology changing the nature of conflict? And we'll be talking about that in the webinar today. So that will be the first kind of meaty session that we do together. Second area of inquiry is the flip of that. So how can we integrate technology in peacemaking? What is technology doing to make peacemaking easier or more effective? That will be the second area of discussion today. The third area of inquiry is actually not something we're going to cover on the webinar today. The third area of inquiry is asking about the intersection of peacemaking and technology governance. Very specifically, we're thinking about how the design of technology influenced by policies and regulation can determine whether technology contributes to drivers of conflict or to an enabling environment for peace. And we're thinking about that in different ways. And we will have a separate webinar in partnership with the Council for Technology and Social Cohesion to explore that part of the publication. So we won't be talking about that today, but we just wanted to let you know. That's the one that says on the slide, March to be determined. We'll be sending out details of that to anybody who registered to this webinar. So you'll get those as soon as it's scheduled. And then the last area of inquiry, which kind of cuts across all of this, is what we're tentatively calling digital uplift, which is basically how do we get ourselves there? How do we get the peace building and mediation field to the place where digital peacemaking is integrated throughout. And we will be talking about that today. And we actually want to hear some of your stories of digital uplift as well. So we're excited to explore that further in this webinar. There's one aspect of the digital uplift that we won't talk about today, and that has to do with what we are tentatively calling the international legal architecture for digital peacemaking, which is specifically kind of what are the agreements that exist and the agreements that are lacking about the impact that technology has on conflict and on peacemaking. We will have a separate webinar to address that as well, which will be on March 5th. And the time is on the slide, and Julie has just shared the registration link in the chat. So if you're interested in that specific area, we won't cover it today, but you can register for a separate webinar on that, which we'll say a bit more about towards the end of this one. And I think that's it. So back to you, Julie.
Minute webinar, that sounds brutal. Usually we're trying to make webinars shorter, not longer. And that's true for us. Though this time, as Elena just talked about, we have a lot to cover. And the intention of this is that it's really collaborative. The Accord publication is useful to the extent that it meets the questions and needs of those who are reading and using it. And so with that, we will be having many opportunities throughout the webinar for you to share your feedback, your thoughts, your questions, etc. And we're going to be using Menti to do that. So if you can queue it up, that would be useful for the rest of the webinar. You can either get there just on your browser by going to menti.com and adding that code there that's on the left. Or if you want to use your phone, you can pull it out and get the QR code ready, because we'll be asking you several questions throughout the webinar. And giving people a minute to do that, we can get started with just a first question to get our Menti muscles exercising. Is just simply, and with a big hi, simply, if you only read one article in the Accord 31 publication, what would you want it to be about? And say that in 1 or 2 words. And we'll give it a minute for folks to get that Menti up.
I will also say that if anybody has not used Menti before and you're like, what am I doing? Where am I going? You can ask your questions about how to use this in the chat, and I'll make sure to reply. To the first one,
Yeah.
Jonathan, the code is always at the top of the slide. So if you go to menti.com and then the code is, Julie is hovering over it right now, it's 59103108.
Great. It looks like we can see some people getting on there now, so we'll give it a few minutes as these come in. Amazing. So at no point in this webinar are we going to surprise you by putting you into breakout rooms where you need to talk with a small group or anything like that. But we will be asking you many of these kind of questions as we go along the way. So you can have that browser open or your phone open to the Menti. Great, here are some things coming up. Good practices, pros and cons, tensions, examples and use cases, misinformation campaigns, Luddite peace building. That's great. protection of data. Okay, we'll let a few more come in. It's useful to see where people are, what kind of topics people are hoping will be covered.
As you also, if you have the Menti link open, you will be able to follow along as Julie and I present the different slides. So you'll see not only the questions we're asking you, but also what we're talking about. You'll have the slides visible to you, just so you know. Oh, lots more coming in.
Yeah, that's great. Measuring peace, that's great. Timescales, beyond trends or gimmicks.
I'm
Wonderful.
really loving the two in the center.
I know. Risks and Luddite peace building. Like, let's worry about this. That's great. And future trends. Awesome. Trustworthy AI. Yeah. So many good things here. Luddite is staying. Whoever put that, kudos.
It wasn't me, by the way, in case you were wondering, the Luddite.
It could have been. We might have suspected you. Reveal yourself in the chat if you're the Luddite. Okay. Awesome. This is great. Okay, shall we keep moving? All right. Final 10 seconds if you need to push enter so your contribution doesn't get lost. Okay, moving on.
So we said that the first thing we were going to have a more substantive conversation about was this idea of the impact of technology on conflict. And what we're trying to do in this section of the publication is really make some arguments for the nature and significance of technology in conflict, and then explore some areas of impact concretely in some of the articles. So the main arguments that we're making about the nature of significance and the nature and significance of technology in conflict revolve around this idea that digital technologies are intrinsic to how wars are fought and how peace needs to be made, as Zan said at the beginning, and to really kind of explore the concept that where conflict happens off and online, peacemaking needs to as well. So these are not two separate things, but for the Luddites out there. But if you're thinking about offline conflict, you also need to be thinking about online conflict. And so within that, there's kind of two things that we're specifically thinking about. One is that technology is changing the nature of war and warfare, and that it's also affecting geopolitics and diplomacy, including kind of different alliances, so alliances between different countries, the scramble for AI dominance, all of these kinds of issues. And then secondly, that technology interacts with existing drivers of conflict and creates new drivers of conflict. So it's not just, I saw some of you put out there things like hate speech or polarization, etc., online, but it also interacts with existing divisions in society that can escalate to violence. So in general, those are kind of the arguments that we're making about why it's important to think about technology and conflict. And then specifically, the areas of impact that we're exploring in articles are in the area of technology and war and warfare, thinking about AI-based advances in military technology, particularly around targeting and drones, and also offensive cyber operations. When we think about digital geopolitics and diplomacy, thinking about the scramble for AI dominance, digital alliances and rivalries, and competition over technology resources. When we're thinking about the drivers of conflict, the sort of new drivers of conflict that technology creates, we're thinking about narrative threat in general, or thinking about things like manipulative online influence, algorithmic amplification, misinformation for hire, information warfare in general. And then finally, we're also paying attention to the intersection of climate, technology, and conflict. So thinking about the issues that sit at the nexus of climate change and technological advancement and how these might impact conflict drivers. So this is things like how the need for certain resources for things like data centers might exacerbate resource-based conflict. So those kinds of arguments. So that's more or less what is covered in this section. Julie, over to you.
Okay, now take a good look again at some of these why arguments. If you need to reread it or just take another look, because we're going to ask you a question next about what's missing. Like, what is missing in this set of arguments about why, or what's critical to strengthen the case that peace builders need to care about the impacts on conflict. So have a look, and then I'm going to move over now to that question. And we'll do a couple of questions like this, and then we'll have a moment to kind of discuss this area more broadly if you have questions. Instead of holding your questions to the very end of the webinar, we're going to do it as we're going. Okay, so again, pull out that Menti or get the browser back up if you can. And we'll give everyone a moment to input here. Technology and how humans interact. Yeah.
So Henny is asking for a definition of peacemakers in this context, which
Oh, useful.
I'm gonna while people input, I'm just gonna, and Zand can also jump in on this one. This
Yeah.
is something that we've realized we need to be quite upfront about in the publication, that we need to provide some kind of definition of peacemaking. I know I've written it somewhere in my notes, but obviously I haven't got it right here. But I think one of the things that people ask us is, are you talking about mediation or about peace building? And I think we're talking about both, with an emphasis on mediation. And concretely, we're thinking about anywhere where the use of dialogue, negotiation, and other social cohesion measures are being used in a conflict setting to achieve some kind of peace process outcome. It doesn't have to be a peace agreement. And I think we need to get clearer on that and write it out better. But Zand, I know you had some thoughts on this as well. So do you want to say more?
Not a huge amount more. No, we've kind of left it a little bit open to evolve as we go forward. But yeah, I think dialogue is important. The idea of people talking with each other in order to create some kind of peaceful change. Um, so not a sort of purist mediation where anything goes in terms of sort of outcome, but also making sure that dialogue is an important part of the process. So we will continue to sort of work out the definition as we go forward, and I think there is an intention to include something more concrete in the final publication to clarify what it is exactly that we're talking about. But that's the kind of space we're in, sort of interface between peace building and peacemaking.
Zand, actually, that thing that I just typed in the chat is my note of something that Zand said in a conversation where we were talking about this, that I thought was a really kind of nice, pithy, simple way of putting it. I don't know if you remember this, Zand, but you said peacemaking covers the various ways people talk to each other to come to an agreement about how to live together, which I thought was a really nice, pithy definition.
Yeah, I'll take that. That sounds good. Thanks, Elena.
And this is what happens when you get a bunch of smart people on a webinar call together, is that we have just an amazing amount of input here. So we have a few minutes. I wonder, Xander, Elena, what of these stand out to you, if any? And for others, do you have other questions? Feel free to put those in the chat as we're talking about this topic specifically.
So one thing that I will say, less as a standout and more as a clarification, is that I've seen a few that are to the same effect as this last one here that says maybe the positive impacts. And so what I will say about that is that there are two sections. One, which is tech is doing all of these things that are making conflict worse. What can we do about it? And then there's another one, which is tech is allowing us to make peacemaking much better. And here are the different ways. So the only reason you didn't hear that is because we'll come to that section later. So it's not that I don't agree with that statement. It's just that we're trying to kind of keep the two conceptually separate. And then the other one that I would say is there's a lot on here about biases, taking an intersectional approach to understanding issues, kind of issues of power, and asymmetry of digital literacy. I saw one at the beginning. I do actually think that's something that will come out throughout, but I have wondered whether we need a specific space to discuss that also. Oh, wow. Thanks, Julie.
These are some of those groupings. Yeah.
Sweet.
I think there was one on there about how increasingly people interact online as they, so relationships happen online, positive and negative. I think we've making quite a point not to say digital is everything. It's the interface between sort of offline and online. But at the same time, it's important to remember that a lot of interaction does happen online, and that's how people communicate. And that translates into the physical world as well, both in terms of conflict, but in terms of people making connections and talking to each other. So that's really important, I think.
I think it's really interesting that this issue of tech sovereignty is coming out quite so strongly. I'd say this is an issue that straddles both this section on the impact of technology on conflict, and then that section that I talked about where we want to talk about tech governance and peacemaking. My sense is this is an area of growth for our field, so I'm not surprised that there's so many people on this webinar interested on this about this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's useful. And part of the intention for having this type of collaborative webinar is for those of us that are here and working in it and researching in it, can we get a sense check about what might be our collective research and practice agenda? Like, where are the places that we need to push more on? What are open questions? All right, we've got one question in the chat from Nick.
It's actually a comment, and it's a brilliant
Okay.
comment. Nick, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying here. So Nick is talking about how if, this issue of the use of AI in warfare is very shiny, and by that I mean it attracts a lot of attention, both in discussions in the media, but also in discussions actually amongst mediators, and also that there's a danger that it overshadows other kind of more pervasive issues to do with AI and its impact on conflict. And that if we start talking about how to make AI weapons safer, then it can easily turn to militarized thinking. Nick, fully agree with that. I think it's something that, that one of the reasons why we want to lead with acknowledging that issue is because we know so many people focus on it, but hopefully the fact that there's a number of other issues that are talked about in respect of why we should care about technology and conflict addresses some of your points here. But I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah. Also a great bridge to our next question. So pull out your Menti again. This is a bit of a where are we now? And these are sliders. So how prepared do you think the peacemaking field is to engage with each of these different areas of impact? On the right, you think it's very well prepared, very prepared. And on the very left, not prepared. Great, we've got more rankings coming in. We'll give it a minute for this to settle. It was really interesting. I would have said the same, that narrative threats and information warfare would kind of be on the right end there, in part because that's been a focus of the field for so long, almost a sole focus.
I agree with that. I'm surprised that people think we're so prepared for the climate technology conflict nexus.
Mm.
Um, Maybe that's a blind spot for me personally, but I haven't seen a lot of work in this area. I wonder whether it's that we're hoping that the work that's been done in addressing resource-based conflict also can be used, that the same kind of mechanisms and structures can be used for this new aspect of it.
Mhm. All right. A moment here also for any questions or comments that people want to put in the chat. This is interesting. Otherwise, I'm gonna move to the next one, and then we'll still have a few moments if you're still typing. Okay. So again, this is open. What other areas of impact should be represented? And this may have come up already in the first question, but if there are others that you've thought of since or didn't quite put in there.
Maybe, Julie, while we wait for people to type, I can also just say that we said it at the beginning, but I just want to say it again for anyone who joined us. The whole point of doing this in a collaborative way is that we want to make sure that the accord, like past accord issues, is really addressing all of the different things that as a community of peace builders and mediators, we're all worried about. So these
Mm.
aren't just going into the ether. This isn't just like, oh, that's interesting, and then we're going to leave it. We're going to be, we've done some structuring of the publication and some commissioning already, but there's still space for more. So what comes out of here is really going to inform how we move forward, and what additional issues we reflect on. So yeah, huge
Yeah.
thank you, because this is so generative.
Yeah. A lot of gender, which is great. Yeah, it's a clear area of impact. I also just put in the chat, because we're a few slides past it, what areas we know are being engaged right now in articles. Mm.
This issue of human cognition and trust and veracity, but also the cognitive overload and crisis decision making, the mental health aspects.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting, because I think we're only just starting to touch on that, right, in our field. I don't know if some of you may have been part of this online conference that happened a few weeks ago, organized by Neuropath, on the sort of intersection of behavioral science and peace building or peace. Not just about technology, but technology came up a lot. And I thought some of the insights from behavioral science there were really interesting. So maybe thinking about how that integrates.
Great. Just out of curiosity, see what we're getting here in terms of themes. Yeah. Gender. Top. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Let's keep moving. There will be lots more opportunities to engage. Okay. Elena, what's next?
Okay, so we said we talked about the impact that technology has on conflict. That's the sort of like doom and gloom. This is what tech is doing to conflict. What are we going to do about it? But we also know that the integration of technology in peacemaking, in the art of peacemaking, can be very positive. I just want to reinforce that nobody on this webinar, as in the three of us, or anybody involved in the publication, thinks in any way that technology will replace humans in the mediation or peace building field. I think in general, what we think is that hybrid work, hybrid processes will be critical. And the arguments that we make for the case for integrating technology and peacemaking is that digital peacemaking is not a niche area separate from mainstream peacemaking, but central to the practice of peacemaking today and into the future. And concretely, that technology offers affordances in data management. I saw that come up in one of the comments, but also in communications and in networking that can increase the reach and the impact of peacemaking work. Also, it's critical for peacemakers and mediators to respond to the impact that technology is having on conflict. So all these impact areas that we were discussing before need to be responded to through peacemaking interventions, online or offline. So what areas of opportunity are explored in the articles? There is some exploration of the different analysis tools that can be that can help peacemakers. So different AI and digital tech for conflict analysis. Also, the idea of inclusive participation. So how can digital participation help to raise voices, new or different voices? That's not to say at the exclusion of offline participation, but as part of a hybrid package. A third area is around dialogue and mediation. So some of you will be very familiar with deliberative tech platforms that allow for different ways for people to interact that are very different to the sort of algorithmically managed communications on social media and more focused on constructive dialogue and constructive disagreement. So how can deliberative tech platforms help peacemaking, help to build bridges and to connect people differently? But also, how might we use AI agents to inform the strategies that peacemakers choose to go forward with, to play out different strategies, to also present different views to people who are participating in consultations or in dialogues. So all of that as ways that we might use tech in dialogue and mediation. And then I said, it's also critical for peacemakers to respond to the impact of technology on conflict. So how might we manage digital harms? How can we mediate online space, create codes of conduct or agreement for online space that mitigate some of the harms that we talked about before? How might we counter narratives where hate speech or polarization is rampant in a conflict context? And then finally, how might we respond to the challenges of technology that technology brings to warfare that are new? Do we need a concept of digital ceasefires? Some people on this webinar I know have worked on that. But even when it's just a regular ceasefire, how do we manage ceasefires when drones and AI-enabled drones are part of the picture as they happen in many recent conflicts, including in Gaza and in Ukraine? And how might we think about how to manage cyber attacks as part of that complex new warfare landscape? So that's a lot of things. Maybe, Julie, you want to give people a minute to digest that? I also see a lot of activity in the chat, but I haven't read it. Do we need to address something in there?
The activity in the chat is generally, can you share these things after? And the answer is yes, we'll be sharing those. Yeah.
As well as the recording.
As well as the recording. In addition to some thoughts. So take a moment to read. Everyone settle this, digest. And also before we move on, let's have a moment for clarifying questions to Elena about what we actually mean by any of these things. What does it mean that these areas are explored in the articles, etc. So if you have any kind of clarifying questions before we again get more input, then put that in the chat as well.
Henny, I'm going to share the details of that conference in just a second in the chat. I'll go look for them while more questions come in.
All right, we're getting a few questions in. Also, just a note for people using the chat that you have the option to send a chat only to the hosts and panelists, in which only us three will see and not everyone else, or you have the option to send it to everyone. So just so you know that both of those are there. So if you meant to send it to everyone, but only we can see it, you might want to resend. So we have a few questions. Elena, do we already have general findings from the headings that we can share, or is it you need to wait for the accord to come out? And Catherine's interested in what we mean by the inclusive participation. Oh, you're on mute. Good.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted myself. We, I mean, do we have I think general findings exist already, about all of these points, but I think the point of the Accord 31 is to try, to take a step back and gather, a sort of good, solid analysis, about each of these points, exploring it through different articles. We have some of those articles in draft right now, but we don't have an answer to these questions, if that's what you're looking for. I think that will have to wait for the publication. Unless, Zan, do you disagree? I don't think there's any kind of general points we can share right now.
No, but I just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify for people that the contributions to Accord are, it's not written by us three here. They're written by lots of different people with different experiences. And then we have other activities as part of the project over the next months to engage with different types of audience to reflect on what we're finding, help us pull out the findings. So there might be some spaces where we can sort of share draft findings along the way. Um, and then we will be pulling together findings and recommendations early next year that we can share more publicly. But the whole thing is a kind of collective enterprise, with lots of different brains and expertise, contributing to it along the way.
Yeah, so I think that also kind of frames the answer to Catherine's question about inclusive participation. I mean, we're posing the question, Catherine, and I think what I would say is that in the publication there will be a really great article looking specifically at digital women's participation and how that has, what that's done to peace processes, positively and negatively, by the way. So it's not just a cheerleading of digital women's participation. And I think the idea is to really, often when people think about technology, they think, oh, great, well, if we use tech, we'll be able to just reach more people and engage them, and that will mean, more inclusive participation. But it's a lot more complicated than that. It's good for some things and not for others. So I think it's trying to complicate that question and explore really where it's useful, where it makes things truly more inclusive. And where there are challenges to that. That's what I would say. But I don't have an answer because, as Zan said, like these are not articles that we are writing. It's different people are contributing.
And one outcome that will come of this meeting that we're having together is posing some of those questions to the authors on these topics to get sort of the questions that you're bringing in or the angles that you'd like to see. For example, we have a couple more good questions in the chat from Nicola and Nick, and from Nicola and Nick about, can tech help us sort of recover the movement? Where peace building sort of had its origin in social movements and has lost it in technocracy. Can it help recover that? And Nick asking about the impacts of data centers, which is a great question and could also go in the impact of tech on conflict as well.
Yeah, so the impact of data centers, I think is actually I think we've actually commissioned an article that will cover that, written by I'm gonna help me out, Julie. It's the Center for Conflict and Climate Action in the Philippines.
Yeah.
So it is something that I think will be explored. Nick, I think it's a hot button issue, not just in the US, but certainly beyond.
Yeah. Continue to hold these thoughts and comments to our next question. Again, this is looking at where before we were looking at why peacemakers should care about the impact of tech on conflict. Here we're looking for what's missing or critical to strengthen the case for peacemakers to integrate tech into their peacemaking practice. Like, what arguments really do you think support the move for peacemakers to realize that this holds opportunity and potential for their work?
And folks, it makes it easier for us if you put some of your answers and your thoughts in the Menti, but if also the longer kind of comments that are in the chat, we're not going to lose those, so don't worry. And we will download that chat before this webinar is over to make sure we capture those as well.
And just to say also that, in a sort of something that's rather precarious for editorially precarious, but is good for the publication, is that we have left a bit of space in the publication to bring new analysis into it from this kind of conversation of, oh, we really need to cover that. So that's another way that we capture things along the way, and these conversations are so helpful.
Great additions coming in so far already. Also, just a reminder, some of the whys that we put forth were that it's not in each area, it's central to peacemaking and integrated peacemaking practice, that it has specific affordances in data and communication and networking, and that peacemakers have to respond to the tech's impacts on conflict. So we're asking kind of what else? What are we missing? Really interesting. Some themes already on kind of affective or emotion. Also in prevention. I'm surprised that that didn't come up earlier because sometimes that's the first place people go is, oh, this is early warning. It's clear.
I also think the youth aspect that's coming out here is really relevant. Yeah. Somebody said intergenerational in the previous discussion, which I think might be touching on that point as well.
Mm.
Sort of who do you reach, you know, not thinking that
Yeah.
it could be used for anyone, but has particular advantages for certain groups.
Yeah, this one's a bit I appreciate this one. It's a heavier stated than we said that we're living in an integrated universe, but this one sort of doubles down on like, this is our new social reality. And so it has to be dealt with. Yeah, stories and case studies are really useful always for making this type of argument. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most, if not all, of the commissioned authors are kind of building from this sort of experience of practice and have case studies to share. At least there will be many case studies in the publication.
So it's actually a combination, Julie. The
Mm.
section that makes the argument for why tends to be a little more reflective and not theoretical because that's not the point, but more kind of like analytical if you want, like these are the kinds of things. Whereas the section on what, you know, what is actually happening, how are things being addressed is much more experience based. So talking about concrete experiences of how technology has been used in peacemaking or how the impact of technology has in fact been managed, or how it could be managed. So there are some kind of like looking ahead, what do we need to think about 5 years from now? One of the things that somebody said very early on is you need to make sure that this thing stays current. So we are asking anybody who contributes to the publication to think about, okay, so you're writing all of this, but what happens 5 years from now?
Mm. All right, here's our groups, which are just great sort of arguments in bullet points. Cost efficiency, youth engagement, emotional impact, scaling potential, that comes up a lot, risk management, inclusion, and evidence. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, keep this good brainwave going to the next question here, which is now we're asking you to rank the priority of each digital peacemaking opportunity area as you see it. So this doesn't have to be what you think, the field at large needs to focus on, but in your mind, what do you think the most important opportunities are? And you can drag and drop these so that they go in order. It feels like we're going to watch a leaderboard. Who will come out top?
Don't you think, Julie, that if we had, I wish we'd asked this question 10 years ago and
Oh,
we had a
absolutely.
comparator,
I would love to compare.
right?
What do you think would have made it on top 10 years ago?
Analysis tools,
Yeah.
without a doubt. I don't think managing digital harms would have been anywhere.
Yeah.
It would have been like an afterthought.
Yeah. But that kind of speaks to the early warning promise of also early peace tech.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Thought
and
more
also,
data equals better decisions.
yeah, and also the fact that we hadn't seen the unraveling of the impact of social media on communications and human relations as much, right?
Yeah.
Would you have put the same five things in 10 years ago?
It's a
Mm,
great question.
it's a great question.
I don't
Like
think
10 years
that,
ago, there was, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no,
There
you
was
go.
quite a focus on games. I don't know where you'd put that
Mm.
in now. Yeah.
It's true.
Well, I think we got a baseline now, but if we did it in a few years' time, would
Yeah.
you wouldn't just ask the same questions, probably there'd be other things to add in.
Totally. I don't think the dialogue and mediation would have been, I think we would have called that something else. It would have been like communications and
Civic engagement.
civic engagement.
Something.
Yeah, it would have just been very different. Yeah.
Also, an invitation for those of you who were thinking about these things 10 years ago in the chat. Let us know what you think. Okay, really interesting. Giving up just a final 10 seconds if you haven't submitted and you want to. We'll move to the next. Okay, last question. What's remaining? What are not so we kind of did the why question about what do we need to make the case, and we have some really succinct arguments there: cost efficiency, scaling, youth engagement, etc. But then we have kind of the areas of impact. So this is this ceasefires? Is this AI agents? Is this, you know, the other areas of opportunities peacemakers could use in their work? And what's missing? What do we not have covered? Or what questions need to be addressed about tech and peace building? Like what extra bits of evidence do we need? What types of examples would be useful for people to know about? Hmm.
That first one is music to my ears.
Is it? Because it's also a like, is this the key? Is this the key to getting responses?
Well, yeah. Julie knows that I have a particular bugbear against early warning because I just think, well, I think what the main thing I think is what's on that thing, which is basically we have a lot of early warning and very little effective early response. But kind of connected to that, I often feel like, who are we warning? And are we warning the right people? And that's been an issue, long before it was AI powered. Like when the kind of 10 years ago, it would have been crowdsourced early warning was like the big thing,
Mm.
right? Um, so yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
I'm not writing that article, but maybe I'll slip in a line or two about that somewhere.
good move. You got a plus one, a couple. Yeah, really interesting. This one's really interesting to me. Like, is just the landscape of who calls themselves peacemakers or who is doing this work changing?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Mm. Disabilities or different abilities is something I'd really love to see better integrated into kind of all research and practice. Also a great point. Can be easily left on the table. Also considering that conflict events are one of the most, if not the most, disabling events for populations.
Totally.
You have a volunteer for the early warning in the chat.
Yes. Let's do it.
Is on interoperability. Oh, not the trap. Okay, interoperability question is really interesting. Do you have thoughts on that?
I think there's so much there, right? Because it's kind of like, are we talking about the interoperability of data or of platforms, both of which are relevant here? Um, uh, it's definitely one of those things that comes up often when we talk about early warning and data analysis. Is like if we just made all of this data interoperable, we wouldn't have to collect anymore. It's also almost impossible to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Also, shout out to Liz Berry, who I don't think is on the call, but who has made this her sole focus currently at MetaGov. You
100%.
can share more about that if you want.
Slight,
Mediating. Yeah, go ahead.
slight variation on the interoperability question is like if institutions are thinking about um, integrating digital into their institution,
Mm,
does everyone do the same thing, or do some people specialize on some things so they can collaborate across different
Mm,
institutions? How does that kind of ecosystem work, you know?
yeah.
the interoperability of people, not just of machines. Somebody wrote mediating the machines. And I don't know if you're thinking what I'm thinking, but if if you are, I'm really interested in that. I think that's a really, that idea of like, yes, we talk a lot about bias, but how could we use some of the principles of mediation to overcome bias and to mediate what comes out of the machines? If that's where you're going, I think that should be something that comes into tech governance, which of course is the thing that's coming out very much in the topic clustering.
It's also a line in a poem, and I'm trying to find
I
it.
was thinking that too. It is a line in a poem.
Yeah,
If
I
you
don't
wrote
know,
that
Jeff.
comment and you were thinking of the poem, please tell us.
Yeah,
Otherwise, we will find the comment, the poem.
yeah, exactly. Okay, some groups coming up. Tech governance. Yes, great. We have a webinar coming up about this specifically. That'll be a key area. Peace education. Yeah, I mean, that would have been 10 years ago, probably like a bigger focus that maybe shouldn't get dropped off. Yeah. Collaboration platforms, which I think also kind of speaks to the interoperability. Public engagement. Yeah, early learning there again. All the power dynamics. Accessibility. Yeah, wonderful. Again, we'll share these as well as the groupings because it's useful to see the themes that are arising. Okay, we are more or less on track with an agenda, but it's been nearly an hour. And so the next invitation actually is to have you do more questions, but quietly and on a different browser. And what this questionnaire that we're about to post aims to do is to collect some of these stories specifically around how institutions, and maybe even particularly institutions that don't have innovation in their mandate. Like, for example, Build Up, we're kind of a digital first organization. It's a given that we're integrating tech into most of the things that we're doing. But Zan, Conciliation Resources is a really kind of like stalwart mainstream peace building organization that doesn't contain that type of mandate. So how do different types of institutions and organizations, how are they handling this? And one area that's happening in the core publication is essentially a showcase of the different pathways that organizations are taking and have taken to integrate tech into their peacemaking practice. So with that said, I'm putting this link into the chat and recognizing that we're at the hour and some people might need to drop off. So before you drop off, just put this link in your browser, um, and you can save it and submit it at any time. And we'll also send this up in the follow-up. But for those who are sticking around, we're now going to take a 10 to 15-minute break to go do this survey on your own. It'll be quiet for a moment. I might put on some music, and we'll come back at 5 after the hour. The survey only has 13 or so questions, and so it should only take 10 minutes. Any additions, Elena, to what I've said?
It's a chance to take a break and then come back and hear Julie's great insights on some of the questions that are in the survey. So
Exactly.
If you have to leave, leave. But if you want to stick around, you're still going to get some good stuff from Julie. So do,
Yeah,
if you can, come back at 5 past the hour.
perfect. Thank you.
Some people were asking in the chat whether this is being recorded, which it is, and the recording will be shared with everybody along with the slides and the link to this questionnaire as well, to the survey.
Right, everyone, this is a 2 minute, we'll be back in 2 minutes. So if you're wrapping up that survey, you've got about 2 minutes left. Okay, I think we're ready to get started again. It was a bit of sleepy music. I could have done dance beat instead, but okay. Welcome back, everyone. Um, Thank you to those of you who submitted the survey already. If you haven't got to it, keep that up. That will be really useful and instrumental in sharing some of these patterns and stories that are emerging in the publication for others. So, what we're getting to next is essentially we can make all of the cases, all of the arguments for how tech is impacting conflict or why or how peace builders should start to integrate technology into their peacemaking practice. But this sort of section in this article in the Accord really looks at the nuts and bolts. So even if I know all of the cases and the reasons to do it, if I don't have the resources in my organization, if I don't have the kind of go-ahead potentially from my upper management, if this isn't a strategy built in, sometimes those aspirations can get lost. But we also know that an increasing amount of what our sort of more mainstream peacemaking institutions are taking these questions on board in serious ways, whether it's creating new 5-year strategic horizons in which digital is a key component of that, or whether it's ad hoc solving problems for a specific project as it's going and it's kind of emerging. We know that this is happening already. And so the motivation here is to map that out and to help the field and various institutions see how other people are doing it and gather some insights about how they could do it themselves. So the intention here is to see how different organizations are approaching digital transformation. What are patterns that we're seeing across different organization types? And then what are kind of the key areas in which they are integrating tech, whether it's adopting different tools, it's building capacity and skills with their staff, whether it's implementing or engaging new tech infrastructures or updating those infrastructures, whether it's kind of this larger picture of developing other strategies or goals that their organization didn't formally have. So these are the questions that we're bringing into the survey, as you saw, but then into also several interviews with people at different types of institutions. And from some of those early interviews and conversations already, these are some of the patterns that we're beginning to see. That for those who have had varying degrees of uptake, one modality is that it really happens bottom up, that there is an internal champion or two that lobbies, that brokers, that convinces, that tries out, that tests free tools, that develops partnerships, that kind of really pushes this forward in their organization. Another modality that we've seen are kind of more of these top-down, the strategic leadership, or that so upper management or leadership sees that this is a strategic direction for grant making or meeting needs or for any reasons, and instigate kind of these strategy development processes, whether it's a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year horizon that they're looking towards. Another story that we kind of heard is that essentially, well, everyone was doing it. Like that, our peer organizations, those within our network, are beginning to share their examples and case studies of doing these types of things, integrating technology. So it felt like we didn't want to get behind. Another one was simply that we didn't really have time to strategize or think about what we were doing. We just had some practical problems that needed solved. And I think this is true for many of the organizations that began this type of process during COVID and maybe it stuck afterwards. So we needed to meet with these people and didn't have another way to do it. There are other organizations that, while maybe prior to their digital transformation, they wouldn't have been considered kind of a like to have innovation in their mandate per se. But for whatever reason, they are pushing the boundaries. They're at the far end. They're trying to make the case for innovation and sort of driving the field and creating like really valuable lessons and cases for then others to point to and use. And finally, I think this happens in a smaller amount of cases, but in at least one she was in the webinar, but hopefully she's still here and can share this in her own words, is that in some cases there is an institutional identity shift that happens that like this is who we are now. Now we're primarily a tech or primarily a digital first organization where we weren't before, and that just coming out of either deep need or really visible successes after trying things out. Okay, so that's some of the uptake stories that are beginning to emerge, some of the patterns. Some of the barriers is the kind of departmentalization, like, oh, I think we have that, but that's someone else's department. Like they manage that tool. You'd have to talk to someone over there. So that's kind of a barrier in that, yes, the organization or institution as a whole has taken on digital elements, but because it's so siloed, it doesn't really touch a lot of the day-to-day work where it could. In a similar story, many have used sort of, well, that's another organization. So we can just partner or we can look to, or we know that over there they are doing it. And so we haven't needed to do that as well, which there are, I think we'll find will be really valid modalities in terms of kind of external partnerships and collaborations, where this is a way that organizations can integrate tech into their peacemaking where they don't have to fully build their own digital capacities. A key barrier being risk and security concerns. This is top of mind for many, especially when dealing with really sensitive issues. And I think this is especially true for those who are working potentially more at track one levels where this is really important for them, and that people's trust in the tech translates to tech trust in the process. And so that's something that they have to be really worried about. Resource constraints is continual that like yes, we want to integrate things, but we can't pay the subscription fee for, a commercial social media analysis tool or whatever it might be. And so people finding ways around this with free tooling or other ways. Um, Another barrier being that strategic alignment, and I think that kind of connects to the top two, where yes, this is interesting, and like we might have internal champions, or I might even be an internal champion, but I continually get the message that that's just not what we do. That's not our strategy. That's, something for else. That's not our organization's identity or mandate, and so we won't get involved there. Um, and still more, some of the barriers come from experience. Maybe they tried it and it didn't work. Maybe they tried it with a lot of exaggerated promises about the potential of inclusion and maybe solving some of these bigger issues. And then they didn't see kind of the full rewards of that. And I think this has been true, especially for some of the efforts towards women's participation, digital women's participation, at least is where some of those stories came out. And then finally, a barrier just being that there's either limited capacity, small teams, overworked, or there's little interest that there are Luddite peace builders and we love them and they don't necessarily want to integrate tech into their peacemaking. So these are some of the stories that we're seeing so far um, in these interviews. And we want to now have kind of the invitation here together to share some of the stories from you. Yeah, Elena, do you have an addition?
I just want to say, before we move into hearing people's stories, why this is so important to the overall publication, and also to give you a moment to catch your breath, Julie, because um, I think, I think for us at Build Up, but also many other organizations, we've been thinking about this idea of digital peacemaking for quite a while. And Julie, I think it was you who pointed out, we always talk about pilots, and then will those pilots scale? And so the reason to shift this and think about uplift, which is actually something that Zand came up with in an original conversation about this publication, is to really think this isn't really about piloting something small that is over there. It's about how we lift up the entirety of the field or the entirety of our work through the integration of digital peacemaking. And these issues of how uptake happens and what barriers there are very process oriented, but they are so critical to the conversation. And I don't think they often get given the space or the kind of air that they need to really get explored. So
Yeah.
for me, this is quite sort of an exciting part of this publication. Yeah, that way you've
Yeah.
got your breath. Now you can ask people for stories.
Perfect. Yeah. And maybe just a double down. To me, it's exciting because it's so mundane. Like it's exciting because it's absolutely ordinary, and that's what we need. We need sort of less of the hype. Okay. So here's the invitation. Either in the chat or if you raise your hand or ask to unmute, I think we see that and we could just pull you in as a panelist.
If you raise your
Um,
hand, I can pull you in as a panelist, and then you
exactly.
can moderate.
Perfect. And you could share with us either a story, like what has digital integration look like in your institution, a success, a failure, or a question. What questions do you have about how others are doing it that would help you integrate tech further into your institution? And I wonder, Zan, if I could put you on the spot really quickly, as people are thinking about it, for you to just kind of give us an overview of where, like, what triggered Conciliation Resources interest in integrating technology.
Um, yeah, no, that's a good question. We 2, 3 years, well, in the research part of CR, we've done a few bits and pieces we've published some stuff on digital peacemaking. Um, and so then you start to think about it a bit and then that kind of stuff. So we have been engaged for a while, and some of our programs have done their own small things over the last few years. But I do remember maybe 2 or 3 years ago, um, we had a training session on digital peacemaking, which a few people came to and then kind of forgot about. And we asked around a little bit across the organization what people's interest was. And everyone was a bit interested, but I think some of the kind of hesitancy points, Julie, you put through, nobody really was drawn to it or could invest in it or that kind of thing. A similar experience we're having now is many more people are saying, yeah, oh, that's really interesting. We've tried this, we've seen this challenge online. So it seems as the appetite is there, and the interest is there. Um, not to be too sycophantic, but it's certainly helpful to have. We're doing stuff in partnership with Build Up, just to tell people out there, to have people who are sympathetic and know what they're doing to help us understand what our ambitions should be like, what our needs could be, and then actually start to help, okay, well, what does it look like to translate that into practice? So that is feels like we're to let people know we're kind of early phase of this kind of process, and the Accord publication is helpful for us as well. But some trusted expert and sympathetic advice and kind of handholding is feels really helpful.
That's wonderful, Zan. Thank you. And I think it specifically speaks to a kind of, I think what's behind the uplift story as well is that most organizations aren't starting from zero. Like there is some either initial research or maybe a pilot that was done a few years ago or like the infrastructure that's there. And so it really is just how do we kind of do the next step about what we already have?
Yeah, and I can see Elena wants to come in, but just say I don't think we're suddenly thinking we have to be a pure digital organization, and but actually there's a niche where we can, as a mainly in-person organization so far, can engage with other digital people, but also use it ourselves. And so that feels a bit different and a bit less daunting, and you can hang on to what we know about and what we believe in a bit more.
Yeah.
I was just coming off mic to highlight Nick's point in the chat, which Julie is, to your point, is mundane and therefore incredibly important,
Yeah.
which is this point around, unless projects have dedicated funding for integrating technology, many organizations just don't have the funding or resources for it.
Mm.
The challenge I would throw back, and Nick, if you want to come on mic or just continue typing, is why are we going for things that are expensive? Is there a way around that is creative? Either because we either use or we build or we collaborate to build free to use or open source tools, or because we hack things together. Some of our most effective digital peacemaking programs at Build Up use WhatsApp. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, Nick. Sorry to put you on the spot as well. Also, if others have stories, feel free to raise your hand. Okay, Nick raised his hand, so I'm going to bring him in. And then in the meantime, if other people want to think, then we can bring you in as well. Let me see. How do I do this? I think I just do this. Nick, can you?
You're on.
There we go. Yes.
Yay.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. First of all, thank you for this wonderful conversation. And completely agree with you, Helena. I think even then there's kind of like an intimidation factor. I think there are many how do I say this? There are many free to use tools and templates and open source resources that organizations can use, but even then it can still feel daunting if you don't have the technological expertise in the room to think, okay, how do I actually use this interface to build a tool of my own that we could use in the program? So, and I say this as somebody who is like the lead tech person at AFP, right? But I think there can be this kind of intimidation of many people recognize the importance, but they are hesitant to roll up their sleeves and dive into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But completely agree to your point.
Yeah. I would say, Nick, too, I was actually thinking of you as a tech person at FP, is that like we're finding that sometimes people come into that conversation of like, I'm either techie or I'm not. And there are so many bridge steps along that way through which you, I think, are playing like an important one of those bridge points. And you might not feel like you can reach all the way to the other side, but maybe you sort of to the next. And if we can each sort of like push to that next, then maybe we can create these collaborations.
Right, definitely. And like I think that there are lots of organizations in this ecosystem that have put together tools and templates that other organizations could use. And there's big power in networks to socialize those and amplify those, and that takes time, right? It takes like dedicated convenings, it takes follow-on convenings, one-on-one conversations. So I think like conveners and networks have a really important role to play for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus one. I want to pull in Guy's question, who's sort of asking about organizations' internal stack, which I think is just a great question in and of itself. It's something that I want to start asking in conversations and interviews I'm doing. But it also makes me think of another question that there's sort of the kind of operational, everyday, internal use of tech, and then there's kind of the strategic use of tech for peacemaking projects. And I think that those are often separate things, not that there can't be, not that those don't already include kind of an infrastructure that can be built off. But I think there is some risk of saying like, well, I mean, we have Zoom calls as a team meeting. Does that count? And I think the answer is like, no, unless it's somehow strategic to peacemaking goals. I think that that's a separate category. Still important. And also, I don't have an answer to your question, Guy, but I would also like to know that. Great, we have about 2 more minutes. So if you're typing and you need to push enter, if you want to raise your hand to make sure a story is captured. Yeah, great. I'm just going to read this out loud, so I'm also reading it from Himanshu. Tech talent is costly. Yeah, so it's not just the tools. Orgs hire on short contract-based funding. Documentation is code is lost when the funding is lost. And key leadership don't always have the curiosity and skills to ask the right questions. Yeah, it's true. That really speaks to that kind of bridge questions. And I think that that is also frustrating on the side of sort of tech collaborators is just the miscommunication that can happen when we're not really sure how to explain our needs or what we want. And thank you, Catherine, for organizing and listing these barriers. That's so useful. Like knowledge, skills, language, trust.
I
Yeah,
think that last point on trust of tech is, yeah, could do a whole thing on that.
yeah. And sometimes the inverse too, which is also interesting. Like there should be a little less trust. Yeah. That's great. If people want to input on Marie's question, but that's also something that I can integrate as questions for interviews as well. Okay, wonderful. So maybe again, we're saving this chat. This is so useful. These inputs are great, and the discussion has been so generative so far. Let's move to kind of closing up. Um, We've sort of mentioned this throughout, but all of the conversations and inputs and mentees and chats and all the thoughts here will hopefully, ideally, the plan is that these are shaping the Accord 31 publication so that it can meet to the extent possible the needs and the questions that the peace building community have that would be interacting with this article. And so that's done. And Zan sort of talked about the open space that was sort of withheld to be able to have some of this come up, but also we'll be sharing these perspectives and questions with authors of these various articles to make sure that those are engaged. There are also more opportunities. This isn't the only time. As we mentioned at the beginning, there's these two, and maybe we post in the chat again the registration, especially for the webinar that is next week. And this is a live stream in which she'll be talking live and we'll be sharing that, but we'll also be able to integrate questions. If you're joining on Zoom, we'll ask the questions that you have to the presenter there. And finally, we've mentioned, but we'll share this recording. We'll also share the outputs that we've created together in terms of the mentees, which includes kind of all of the comments that were put there, but their groupings. So we'll be sharing that as well. Let's see. Anything else? A big thank you. And maybe we put in the chat how to reach us if you have questions. It's team@howtobuildup.org. And Zand, if you want to put yours in as well.
I also reshared the link to register for the March 5th meeting, so you can do that as well.
Great. I've been saving the chat periodically, but I'm doing it again a final time. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. And this is always an experiment to have an interactive, very long webinar like this. And so just a huge appreciation. I found this to be really invigorating and generative. So thanks to everyone for your participation throughout the whole 90 minutes.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.